Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of India's biggest, most ambitious welfare programs, the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi. You probably know it as PM Kisan. At its very core, it's about this simple, powerful number, 6,000 rupees a year. That's the amount promised directly to millions of farmer families across the entire country. But, it's never that simple, is it? Who actually gets this money? How does the whole thing even work? And maybe the biggest question of all, is it really enough? These are the exact questions we're digging into today.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the core promise of the scheme. Then we'll look at the digital system that makes it all happen. After that, we'll navigate the eligibility maze, who's in, who's out. Then a balance report card on how it's actually doing. And finally, we'll step back and look at the bigger picture.
Okay, let's dive right in. First things first, what exactly is PM Kisan? What's it trying to achieve? Let's get right down to the basics. So, the key thing to understand is that this is a direct income support scheme, and it's 100% funded by the central government, which is a big deal. The whole idea is to give farmers a little extra cash to help with, well, everything. Buying seeds, fertilizers, but also just for regular household needs. And that 6,000 rupees, it doesn't come all at once. It's split into 3 equal payments of 2,000 rupees each. Now, the way this whole thing was rolled out is pretty interesting. It officially launched in February 2019, but they actually backdated it to be effective from December 2018. That February 1st, 2019 date is super important. That was the cutoff. You had to own land before that date to be in the running. And then, just a few months later, boom, a massive expansion. It went from just small and marginal farmers to all landholding farmers, no matter how big their land was. All right, Section 2. Let's talk about the logistics, the digital engine behind this. Because think about it for a second. We're talking about an absolutely staggering amount of money here. Over 3.9 times lakh crore rupees sent out to more than 11 crore families. How on earth do you move that kind of cash without it getting lost along the way? Well, the answer is something called Direct Benefit Transfer, or DBT. This is where India's digital infrastructure really shines. It's basically a digital pipeline. The government releases the funds, they travel through these super secure digital gateways, and then poof, the money lands directly in the farmer's bank account. The key is that account has to be linked to their Aadhaar. The whole point is to cut out the middleman completely. And it's not just a simple bank transfer either. There's this whole digital ecosystem built around it. You've got a web portal to sign up or check your status. There's a mobile app that even uses facial authentication to verify who you are, which is pretty cool. They have an AI chatbot for instant support in 11 different languages. And if you're not into all the tech stuff, you can just walk into a common service center for help in person. They've really tried to cover all the bases. Okay, so the system is in place to move the money. But now we get to the really tricky part, the eligibility maze. Who's in and who's out? This is where things start to get complicated. All right, so who's eligible? On the face of it, it seems pretty straightforward. The whole thing is built around the farmer family, defined as a husband, wife, and their minor kids. That family has to own cultivatable land. Toss in the obvious stuff like you've got to be an Indian citizen, your Aadhaar has to be linked to your bank, and you've completed your eKYC. Simple enough, right? Well, not so fast. The list of who is excluded is actually way longer. This is the filter. If even one person in that family unit is, say, an income taxpayer, or a professional like a doctor, or a government employee, the whole family is out. Same goes for high-earning pensioners or someone holding a political post. The logic is clear. They're trying to screen out families who already have other stable sources of income. But this next point is the big one. It's probably the single most debated part of the entire scheme. Because it's all tied to land ownership records, it structurally and intentionally excludes a huge group of people. We're talking about tenant farmers, the folks who work the land but don't own it, and landless agricultural laborers. If you're in one of those groups, you get nothing by design. So with all those rules in place, how has this scheme actually performed? It's time for a balanced report card. Let's look at the successes versus the gaps. And wow, when you lay it all out, you really see the two sides of the coin. On the pros side, it's a huge win for transparency. Getting money directly to people cuts down on corruption. It's also pushed financial inclusion, and about a quarter of the beneficiaries are women, which is great. But then you look at the cons column, and it's serious. We just talked about the landless being excluded. The support is modest, and there are real implementation headaches, like data errors or outdated land records causing delays. And I really want to emphasize that point about excluding the landless. This is not a small oversight. We're talking about an estimated 2.4 to 5.4 times crore agricultural families being left out. That's an enormous number of people, often the most vulnerable folks in the rural economy who are completely outside the safety net.
So, besides who gets the money, there's the other big question. Is 6,000 rupees actually enough? I mean, look, 500 rupees a month definitely helps. But in reality, for most small farmers, it's only about 6 or 7% of what they earn in a year. And get this. One survey found that a whopping 98% of farmers said the amount is just not enough to make any real, meaningful investments in their farm. All right, so let's pull back for our final section and look at the bigger picture. What does all of this mean for the future, and where does PM Kisan fit into the grand scheme of things? So, first things first, let's bust a myth. Will the amount be increased? You hear a lot of chatter and rumors, but the official word from the government is a firm no. They've stated there is no proposal under consideration to increase the amount. So for now, 6,000 rupees is what it is. And this chart really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? That tiny little sliver, around 6%, that's the PMKSAN benefit. The other huge chunk, 94%, is all the other income a farmer has to generate. This makes it crystal clear. This scheme was never meant to replace a farmer's income. It's a supplement. Think of it less as income and more as a bit of timely credit for immediate needs. And that brings us to the final, really big question, the one that defines the whole debate. Is PM Kisan a vital safety net for today, a transparent system providing much-needed relief to millions? Or is it a costly diversion from the investments we need for tomorrow? Is all this money, while helpful, taking away from the huge long-term investments in things like irrigation and infrastructure that agriculture so desperately needs? That's the real trade-off, isn't it? Immediate relief versus future growth. Thanks so much for joining us on The Explainer.